My mother-in-law locked a young man in her basement for 3 weeks. Every night, we could hear coughing through the kitchen floor above him. The night my husband finally broke that door open, what we found wasn't what any of us had feared, but the truth that came with it. The truth Sylvia had been carrying alone for 40 years, hurt far more than any lie could have. I'm a physician's assistant at a family clinic in Southwest Portland. 15 years of that work teaches you how to read a room, how to look at a person and see the thing they are trying not to say out loud. I used to think that skill made me useful in a crisis. I had no idea it would be the only thing that kept my family from destroying itself that winter. It started with a Sunday dinner at Sylvia's house in Lake Oswego, 8 months after we lost Gordon. Sylvia's home is a craftsman on a corner lot. Big covered porch, hydrangea bushes along the fence, the kind of house that looks lived in and deliberate. Gordon built the back deck himself the summer he retired. After he died, Sylvia kept everything going. The bird feeders, the bulb garden, the Sunday dinners. People do that. They keep moving because stopping is the thing they can't afford. My husband Aaron drove us out every week. His brother Damon and Damon's wife Stella came most of the time. We ate at the big oak table and talked about weather and restaurants and what Sylvia was planting in spring. It felt normal, which is exactly why that particular Sunday hit so hard. We were halfway through dinner when Sylvia set down her fork and folded her hands on the table. She had a specific way of doing that when she was about to say something rehearsed. I noticed it and paid attention. She said she'd taken someone in, a young man, 23 years old, the son of a distant cousin who'd fallen ill and couldn't work. He needed a quiet place to recover, she said. He was staying in the basement guest room. She wanted us to know so no one would be startled. Damon looked up from his plate. Which cousin? Sylvia named someone none of us had ever heard of. A family branch from Ohio, she said. She'd lost touch with them years ago but had recently reconnected. Mom, Damon said carefully, you don't know this person. I know enough, Sylvia said. Her voice was pleasant. Her hands were completely still on the table. Too still, actually. Genuine calm doesn't require effort. His name is Felix. He's quiet. He won't be any trouble. I'd appreciate it if everyone treated him with respect. Aaron glanced at me. I gave him nothing. I was noting what didn't fit, the prepared quality of her words, the deliberate vagueness, the way she pivoted immediately to asking whether anyone wanted more pot roast. After dinner, Sylvia brought Felix up briefly before he returned downstairs. He was tall but thin, in the way that signals something has been taking from a person for a while. His cheekbones were too sharp. His skin had a gray undertone I had learned to recognize He wore a long-sleeved shirt in a warm house. He shook our hands and said it was nice to meet everyone, and looked mostly at the floor. I watched Damon watch Felix. Damon has the kind of face that doesn't conceal calculation well. He was measuring something. I didn't know what yet. On the drive home, Aaron said the dinner had been strange. I agreed. Neither of us said the thing we were both actually thinking, that Sylvia, our steady and deeply private mother-in-law, had just brought a stranger into her home and was already working to shut down questions about it. In the weeks that followed, we learned the shape of the new arrangement mostly through what was absent. Felix did not come upstairs for meals. Sylvia brought food to him on a tray and returned with the empty dishes. He didn't use the living room or the main bathroom. We never heard the television from the basement. We never heard his voice. What we did hear was coughing. The first time I noticed it clearly, Aaron and I were helping Sylvia with yard work in early December. We were in the kitchen having coffee when the sound came up through the floor. Low, persistent, the kind of cough that carries weight. I set down my mug. Sylvia immediately began talking about something else, with a brightness in her voice that didn't belong there. I let it go, but I began paying attention differently. 2 weeks later, Damon called on a Tuesday evening. He'd been doing some thinking, he said. He was worried about Sylvia. The situation with Felix wasn't normal. Their mother was still grieving, he said. She wasn't in the right headspace to make decisions about who she let into her home. He thought they should look at her finances. Make sure nothing questionable was happening. He used the phrase, diminished capacity, twice in the same call. I asked which attorney he'd spoken to. He said he hadn't spoken to any attorney. The pause before his answer ran about 1 second too long. After we hung up, Aaron sat on the edge of the bed and stared at wall. You think Mom's okay? I told him I thought something was going on, and I wanted to understand it before we decided what it was. I arrived at Sylvia's early the following Sunday, before Aaron, saying I'd been running errands nearby. What I'd actually been doing was thinking about those long sleeves and that particular skin tone, and the categories of medication that leave specific marks on a person's arms. I offered to help organize the pantry. While Sylvia was in the laundry room, I heard the basement door open at the bottom of the stairs. Slow footsteps in the hallway below. I went to the top of the stairs and called down quietly. I said I was sorry to startle him and asked if he needed anything. A long silence. Then Felix came to the bottom of the stairs. He was in a sweatshirt, one hand on the railing. His hair was growing back in uneven patches. I had seen that pattern many times before. I kept my voice easy. "I'm a PA," I said. "I work at a family clinic. You don't have to tell me anything. I just wanted you to know that if you need something, you can ask me." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm okay. I had a bad night." He went back to his room. I stood at the top of those stairs and thought about what I'd just seen. The hair. The careful way he held the railing. The particular conservatism of someone whose body has taught them not to trust sudden movements. When Sylvia came back and found me standing there, her face went through several things quickly before it settled into something controlled. "He's sick," I said. She said yes. She said his treatment had been complicated and he needed rest. She said it in a tone that closed the conversation like a drawer being pushed shut. I let it close, for now. The week before Christmas, Damon stopped by Sylvia's on a weekday afternoon while Aaron was at a job site. Sylvia called me afterward, sounding strained in a way I had only heard from her once before. The day she called to tell us Gordon was in the hospital for the last time. Damon had come by to check on her, she said. He'd asked to see the basement. She'd told him no. He'd said he was worried about her. She'd asked him to leave, and he did, but he stood on the porch for several minutes afterward in a way that made her feel watched. That evening, I pulled up Damon's business filings. He ran a residential development company that had been performing well until about 18 months ago, when a large mixed-use project stalled over a zoning dispute. The company had taken on significant debt to carry the project through. Based on public records, a substantial portion of that debt came due in late winter. Gordon's estate had not yet been fully distributed. Sylvia's home was worth somewhere north of $800,000. Gordon's will included provisions for both Aaron and Damon that would activate on Sylvia's death, or in the event of documented incapacity. I sat with that information for a long time. People who want something rarely announce it plainly. They package it as concern. They use words like worried and responsible, and just making sure. They build the architecture slowly, so that by the time anyone notices it, the structure is already in place. Stella called me 3 days later. She kept her voice light and asked how I thought Sylvia was really doing. I said I thought she was managing. Stella said, "Damon just wants to make sure she's protected, you know? He's been so stressed about all of this." She paused. He mentioned something about power of attorney, just as a precaution. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot for a few minutes before I went inside. I thought about the phrase just as a precaution. I thought about the way Stella had said it. Practiced and careful, the specific care of someone delivering a line they've been given. 3 nights before Christmas, Aaron and I were having dinner at Sylvia's, when the medical alert pendant went off. It was a single sharp alarm from below. Then silence, then again. Sylvia dropped the serving bowl and went for the basement stairs without a word. Aaron was at the door before I reached the hallway. He called down. No answer. The handle was locked from inside. He knocked and called again. We could hear movement, low voices, something being dragged across the floor. Then Felix's voice, faint but clear. I can't catch my breath." Aaron put his shoulder into the door twice. On the third try, the frame splintered and the door swung open. The basement guest room was not what I expected. It was orderly and warm and deliberately arranged. A proper hospital-grade bed. A medication organizer on the nightstand sorted by time of day, the way I arrange them for my sicker patients. A portable oxygen concentrator humming in the corner. On the small dresser, a framed photograph. A woman I didn't recognize and a younger, maybe 16. Both of them laughing at something off to the side. Felix was on the bed, pale and damp, breathing in rapid, shallow pulls. Sylvia was beside him, one hand on his shoulder, her phone to her ear, calmly describing symptoms to someone on the other end of the line. She was specific and precise. She had done this before. I went to the other side of the bed and checked his pulse and told Sylvia what I was seeing. She relayed it. Within 20 minutes, his breathing had slowed and his color had come back. The on-call physician adjusted his protocol and told her to monitor his oxygen levels through the night. Aaron stood in the doorway the entire time. He had gone completely still, not with anger, but with something that doesn't have a clean name. The feeling of realizing that someone you love has been carrying something enormous alone while you were close enough to help. When Felix was resting, Sylvia turned and looked at her son. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just looked at him, the way people look at each other when they know the time for pretending has ended. Aaron said, "Tell me." We sat in the small sitting area of the basement. Felix was asleep. The oxygen concentrator hummed steadily. Sylvia held her hands in her lap and told us the truth. 40 years ago, she was 22, newly graduated, working a clerical job in Cincinnati. She had a relationship that ended before she knew she was pregnant. She had nothing. No savings, no support. A family that would not have helped her. She made the decision she made, alone, and she never spoke of it again. She met Gordon the following year. She built a life. She raised Aaron and Damon, and she loved them in the fierce, specific way of someone who already understood that keeping the people you love is not guaranteed. 3 months ago, a letter arrived from an adoption intermediary. Felix had been diagnosed with leukemia 18 months earlier. His treatment had reached a point where his doctors were exploring bone marrow transplantation. The registry search had turned up Sylvia as his biological mother. They were asking whether she'd be willing to be tested as a potential donor match. She hadn't told Gordon. She had never told anyone. And Gordon had been gone for 8 months, and she was still figuring out how to be in the world without him. She wrote back. She arranged to meet Felix in person, because she needed to see him before she could believe he was real. He came to Portland alone. His adoptive parents had both passed, and he had no one. He was polite and quiet, and completely without bitterness, which, Sylvia said, undid her entirely. She invited him to stay while he continued treatment at OHSU. She set up the basement because it was quiet and had its own entrance, and he needed rest. She ordered the medical supplies and managed his medications according to the oncology protocol. She drove him to every appointment. She hid it from us because she was ashamed. Because she didn't know how to introduce a secret that predated everything. Because she was afraid that if Damon found out, Damon, who had already been making comments about her judgment and her finances since Gordon died, he would use it. "I've seen how he looks at this house," she said. I didn't want to hand him anything. Aaron was quiet for a long time. Rain pressed against the small basement window in a slow, steady rhythm. He said, "We're going to get him proper care. Tonight we figure out what he actually needs. Tomorrow we deal with everything else." Sylvia closed her eyes and exhaled the way people do when they have been holding their breath for months. The next morning, I drove to the hospital with Felix and Sylvia while Aaron made calls. Felix was admitted for monitoring and a medication adjustment. His oncology team met with all of us, and for the first time his full situation was on the table. Family present, care plan visible, nothing hidden. His transplant coordinator looked at me at one point and said it was better for patients to have an advocate in the room who understood what was being discussed. I didn't mention it had taken us 3 weeks and a broken door to get there. Aaron had results from the lab by that afternoon. He was a partial match, not ideal, but workable. His transplant team said it was a viable option that opened real doors in the protocol. I watched Aaron read the report twice, fold it carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't say anything. The decision was already made. What came next with Damon was less quiet. I asked our family attorney to look at what Damon had been building. It turned out he'd hired a private investigator 6 weeks earlier. We discovered this when the PI firm sent a follow-up invoice to Damon's home address. A billing contact he'd probably assumed no one would find. The investigator had been photographing Sylvia's house, logging her routine, and compiling a report characterizing her behavior as consistent with impaired judgment. The basement window appeared in 3 of the photographs. The guardianship petition had already been drafted. It was sitting in Damon's attorney's files, ready to file on short notice. The filing would have given Damon temporary authority over Sylvia's finances and housing while the petition was pending, which, in a case involving an undisclosed family member, could have stretched for months. I put all of it on the table at a family meeting. Aaron, Damon, Stella, Sylvia, myself. Our attorney present. Damon didn't deny the investigator. He reframed it. He was worried about his mother. He wanted documentation. He hadn't done anything wrong. His voice stayed measured. He was good at measured. I slid the invoice across the table. Then the photographs. Then the draft petition. Your company has a balloon payment due in February, I said. Your mother's estate would resolve that. You had a petition ready to file before you'd spoken to a single medical professional about Felix's condition or your mother's actual cognitive state. Stella looked at the papers. Then she looked at her husband. She had always seemed to me like someone who goes along with things until she is required to see them plainly. That was the moment she was required to see them plainly. She said very quietly, Damon. That was all. Damon looked at his mother for a long time. Then he looked at the table. The petition was withdrawn the following week. His PI's contract was terminated. His attorney sent a brief letter indicating no further action would be pursued. Stella called me 2 weeks later, without Damon, and asked how Felix was doing. It was a small thing, but I thought it meant something. 6 months later, the curtains in the basement guest room finally came down because no one was sleeping there anymore. Felix had been moved to the main floor, a proper bedroom with a window that caught afternoon light. He was in the middle of a treatment protocol that was, cautiously, showing results. Some days were hard. Most days were manageable. On the good days, he sat on the back deck Gordon had built and watched the birds at Sylvia's feeders. Sylvia sat with him most mornings. On my days off, I came over and helped manage his medication schedule, which had grown complex enough that even I kept a written chart. Aaron had started driving Felix to his OHSU appointments, and somewhere in those drives they'd started talking. Not about the illness or the history, but the way two people do when they're still figuring out how to stand next to each other. I watched them come back from one of those appointments on an afternoon in early June. Aaron parked in the driveway, got out, and went around to help Felix with the passenger door. Not in the hovering way people sometimes treat sick people, just the easy way you open a door for someone when your hands are free. Sylvia was at the kitchen window. She saw them come up the walk. She pressed one hand flat against the glass for just a second before she turned to put the kettle on. I thought about what she'd said the night we found out the truth, that she was afraid. Afraid of her own past, afraid of what Damon would do with it, afraid of losing Aaron's respect, afraid of being reduced, permanently, to one decision she made alone at 22 years old with nothing to her name. I had thought about what I would have done, carrying a secret like that. I had thought about what courage looks like when it doesn't feel like courage from the inside, when it just feels like getting through one more day, until getting through becomes something closer to living. Sylvia hadn't been brave when she hid Felix in the basement. She'd been human, frightened and imperfect, and doing what she could manage with what she had. What she needed wasn't to have done it differently. She needed someone to open the door. Some of the heaviest things in a family aren't the ones that wreck everything. They're the ones that could have been set down years earlier, if only the person carrying them had believed they were allowed to. Silence doesn't protect the people we love. It just makes us carry the weight alone in the dark, while the people who would help us are standing right there on the other side of a locked door, waiting. We should have opened it sooner. But we opened it, and that turned out to be enough.